This Sunday, Palm Sunday, the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, to the shouts and the songs of a crowd of people, was the last Sunday of the old world. It was the last Sunday before everything changed, before history itself was transformed, before the world hit the swivel point, the pivot point of history and time, with the resurrection of Jesus, who would become the firstborn from the dead, where everything changed in this process and the program of God's renewal and recreation of humanity, and the whole world was kicked into gear. But today is Palm Sunday, and the Gospel of Mark, the author and the storyteller there, provides this short little setup to the well-known parade into Jerusalem story. And this first part of the story, the first verses of chapter 11, actually really captured my imagination this week as I was reading it. It's a curious little story about Jesus procuring his transportation. He arrives at the suburbs on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and he instructs two of his disciples to go to the next town over, where they're going to find a donkey that's never been ridden. He tells them to untie it and bring it back to him. And if anyone questions why they're just walking up and taking this donkey that clearly belongs to someone else, they should simply say, "The Lord needs it." And that's pretty much exactly what happens. I don't know if Jesus had set this all up ahead of time through some kind of like Hertz rent-a-donkey service, or if this is an occasion of prophetic foresight on Jesus' part. But I'll tell you, the idea that first gripped me this week as I was reading this text was this: I really hope it was James and John that Jesus sent to go get the donkey. James and John, who had just been angling for power positions in the kingdom when Jesus triumphantly came to the king's city to take his throne. I hope it was them. And doesn't that kind of seem like something Jesus would do to make a point to his two young friends and disciples? In Mark 10, James and John wanted seats of power in the throne room, but now they get donkey detail. They wanted to look important. Now they look like horse thieves or donkey thieves. To the credit of the two disciples, though, they follow through with Jesus' plans. They trust the instructions of Jesus, no matter how goofy they seemed. Sort of a picture of like humble, unquestioning obedience, though I imagine their questions would have been completely welcome. They maybe were picturing something very different for their own part in Jesus entering the capital city as king. But this humble chore, the donkey fetch quest, was a significant part of preparing the way of the Lord. And our simple acts of obedience, our simple acts of service, our willingness to get our hands and our sandals dirty are part of preparing the way for the Lord as well. It so often seems to be the way that God sets the stage for his most significant transformative work in the world, that he begins with obedient people who do humble chores, maybe who end up smelling a little bit like donkey by the end of them. But it's a preparing of the way. So here's a couple questions to consider. What simple acts of practical, hands-on service is Jesus inviting you to now in order to prepare the way of the Lord as we stand 1 week from the celebration of the swivel point of history? What kind of humble acts of obedient work is Jesus calling you to? And are you willing to do them? Or is maybe donkey detail beneath you? Maybe you'd rather hold out for something more glamorous that comes with a title, some notoriety. The Palm Sunday narrative continues, and now is the moment that we've all been waiting for, where the disciples have brought back to Jesus the borrowed donkey. They've slung some coats over it, and Jesus hops aboard. I will award you 5 bonus Bible points if you keyed in on the fact that Mark provides this little detail that the donkey had never been ridden before. I don't know if you know what that means. I don't know if you've ever seen what typically happens when you try to climb on the back of a 200 to 400 pound animal that has no previous experience of a human being sitting on its spine and grabbing hold of its withers. But perhaps you can imagine that. I know that I did. And it is pretty fun to imagine Jesus trying to saddle break a bucking donkey. My dad was a farmer, and when he transitioned out of full-time farming, he used to keep miniature horses, miniature donkeys as sort of like a hobby. And he had one miniature horse that was less than waist high on me that was supposed to have been saddle trained, so you could theoretically ride it. Not me, I'm way too huge, but my brother Mark, yes. And so we put a saddle on the horse, which it didn't seem to protest. But as soon as Mark tried to climb onto the horse, it did protest. And down Mark went, and it was hilarious. And I laughed for a long time at the sight of my 6-foot-tall brother getting pitched from the back of a 3-foot-tall horse. And I absolutely imagine something similar here with Jesus doing his best to make like 8 seconds on the back of this long-eared little donkey, rodeo Jesus, until one of the disciples finally devises this cartoonish carrot dangling from a stick system to get the donkey to compliantly trot along in a straight line. Jesus aboard his freshly fetched and now moderately saddle-broke donkey and his disciples, along with an entourage of others, now make their way into Jerusalem, the big city, the capital city, the center of Israel's religious and political life. This is a scene that is rife with messianic symbolism, all things that point to the kingship of Jesus, laying down coats and branches, the donkey itself. They're all elements of the parade that borrow from the history and the literature of Israel, that point to the fact that there is something significant taking place here that concerns a royal messianic figure. The crowd surrounding Jesus as he made his way into town are singing words from one of the so-called Hallel Psalms, a section of the Psalms that were often used in worship by the Jewish people on festival occasions like the Passover, which is the festival that Jesus was arriving right on time for. They shouted and they sang, quoting from these Psalms, Hosanna, which means save us. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Despite many of Jesus' previous best efforts to keep down the hubbub about his ministry, he had effectively stirred up all kinds of notoriety for himself by this point. So he had drawn a crowd of followers who were eager to hear him teach, to watch him heal, to reveal the kingdom of which he spoke. But considering the fact that Jerusalem would have at this time been filled with thousands and thousands of extra people who had come to town expressly for the annual family festivities of Passover, you have to kind of wonder if this parade isn't actually a bit of a mixed crowd. Are all of those in the fray singing Hosanna really doing so out of some holy but provisional recognition that Jesus is the King who is coming to fulfill and satisfy the deepest hopes and longings of Israel? Or are some of them just tagging along, enjoying the parade, petting the donkey, caught up in the celebration of a festival season that their family gathers for every year around this time? It's probably both. There were in this crowd probably those who recognized, even if it was imperfectly or in some sort of fragmentary way, that Jesus is God's chosen king, and they are praising him. They lay down their coats, they're singing, they're shouting for salvation and rescue. But there are likely also others who are along for the ride, just keeping up with family and cultural traditions. So here's another question for you. What would it look like for you to join in a genuine procession of worship that prepares the way of the Lord, our King, as we stand 1 week from the celebration of that swivel point? Will you join in deep praise, recognizing Jesus came to meet our hopes and longings, to be our King and to save us? Or are you kind of just along for the ride, enjoying the parade, happy to find some ways to celebrate family traditions together like we do this time of year? Friends, this is Palm Sunday, and this day we remember the last Sunday before the world was changed forever. I invite you to consider for yourselves your own readiness to take up, 1, the simple, humble, maybe smelly chores of someone who accompanies Jesus, as well as 2, the holy acts of genuine worship of the King who is in your midst. Invite you to both of these types of acts because they both prepare the way for the Lord, and they prepare the way for the celebration of the good news that we encounter next week, the beginning of all things being made new.